What's up, everybody? This is Jordan from Wednesday Night Warhammer with another Tyranid Tactics video. This week, I'm going over 5 mistakes that I feel a lot of Tyranid players can make when they are playing the game of Warhammer 40,000. I'm going to go through each of these mistakes, and I'm going to tell you why I think it's not a good thing to do necessarily in your gameplay. And then I'm going to go over a couple of points to make sure that you are not introducing these mistakes into your game as well. Before we get started, though, we have a small word from our sponsor, Secondhand Geek. I'm very excited to announce that Wednesday Night Warhammer is officially partnering with Secondhand Geek. If you're unfamiliar with Secondhand Geek is the best online sales platform for wargamers like you and me. They have miniatures, they have terrain, they have paint, all sourced from people like you and me around the country, around the world. In addition to having access to all of those cool items at a very intuitive and easy to use website, every single purchase made on Secondhand Geek gives a kickback to local game stores all across the country. So if you are interested in providing for your hobby as well as providing for local game stores like the one you play at every single weekend, go ahead, check out our affiliate link down below, and happy wargaming. For your next hobby purchase, consider secondhandgeek.com, your first choice for secondhand games and supplies. Thank you for that commercial, Jordan. Our first mistake that I want to go over is Tyranid players losing their scoring units too early. A lot of times their scoring units are used to, go out and move block and then trade for hopefully a higher end target on your opponent's side of their army. However, our scoring units, even though they're very good, there is a limited number of them that you will have in each of your army lists. Scoring points is how you win. So if you give up your scoring units too early, if you charge your lictors in to hopefully swing high and kill a squad of Space Marines and then your lictor dies, that's going to make your containment way harder to do. It's going to make your established locus way harder to do, and even secondaries like engage in all fronts could be more difficult if you are throwing away your units. That's why you got to baby your lictors. You got to really treat your lictors like they need a little bit of extra attention and care. And honestly, with lictors, neurolictors, even Death Leaper or Lone Ops, it's really kind of easy to dictate when your opponent won't be able to kill them. Measure out the Lone Op distance for a shooting, threat that your opponent has. Make sure that your lictor is safe from that threat. Make sure that you're measuring out charge distances from a unit that you think would be able to absolutely demolish your lictor even after you fights first. Units in Warhammer 40k are only able to be killed when you allow your opponent to activate into them. So if you are specifically having a conversation with your opponent and making sure that your lictors or any other scoring units you have are completely safe from harm, they're probably going to be safe. Of course, indirect and everything else, something like that. 6-inch deep strikes makes things a little bit more difficult. But if you are very intentional with where you place your units, like your lictors, then there's a good chance that you can save them for later on in the game. In addition, when you're using Hormagaunts or Gargoyles, make sure you move block efficiently. The most recent stream that I was on was World Eaters versus a Crusher Stampede list. I highly recommend you check out that stream. It was a lot of fun. I screened out an entire side of the board with one squad of gargoyles and then the other side of the board with just a single spore mine, and I did not let the world leaders come into my shooting castle for 2 or 3 turns, because the first turn I only moved up one squad of gargoyles. The second turn, guess what, I moved up my second squad of gargoyles. So instead of sending both squads of gargoyles up turn 1 to make sure that I'm 100% blocking the entire battlefield, I just very carefully place a spore mine, I very carefully place all of my gargoyles, and very efficiently block the World Eater's movement up to my front ranks. If you're able to do things like that, then you're going to have a large edge above, especially combat armies as well. Last but not least, consider the worth of points per unit. Now, with a lictor, if you are for sure going to be getting 6 points on containment by sending it out to a place where it's going to be activated into, I think that's pretty worth it. I think that is definitely something that's fine, But if it's overexposing, your one gargoyle squad or your one chaff unit in order to get like a small area denial or maybe a baby engaged in all fronts or something like that, consider it again, Make sure that you are very efficiently and understanding the loss of your unit and what points you are gaining. Because once that unit's dead, it's off the table. Our second mistake that I feel like a lot of Tyranid players fall into is not understanding how exactly swingy our army is when it comes to destroying enemy units. Tyranids right now are predominantly a shooting army. I feel like our best units, our most efficient profiles are shooting units. I'm talking about exocrines, I'm talking about Tyranofexes, I'm talking about zoanthropes, even maliceptors, honestly. All of those are just big gun platforms, and they just go around and they can hopefully take out a whole bunch of units for your entire game. However, if you think about those units, each one of those profiles is an incredibly swingy profile. A lot of them can be called casino cannons, especially the rupture cannon Tyranofex. Only 2 shots. It can hit on 2s, but if you're going into something that is a 4-up invulnerable save, then every single time your opponent rolls to make a save, that's a 50% chance that your 200-point model now does 0 damage. So you could shoot a ginormous Tyranofex at just 1 custodian guard, and just nothing could happen. And in addition, we're talking about maliceptors as well as exocrines. It's kind of the same thing. You have D6 plus 3 number of shots. So if you roll a 1 on both your exocrine and maliceptor shots, then that is way less better than if you have 9 shots when you're rolling a 6. So that all comes together to understand that Tyranid's shooting is very swingy, because the whole game is a dice game, right? But if every single point of your activation is influenced by the first dice roll, meaning the number of shots, then your shooting phase can go downhill incredibly fast. That is why I always think about overcommitting or just not committing at all. I want to line up at least 3 guns into 1 possible unit, especially if it's durable, before I'm comfortable activating my shooting phase. Usually the pattern is exocrine shoots first, then a maliceptor or a secondary unit like an exocrine, in order to get the reroll 1s to proc, and then finally finishing off with a Tyranofex, of course, or something like that. Of course, that scenario is going to change depending on the army you're playing against, and the mission, etc., etc. However, I'm not just going to say, okay, this exocrine is for sure going to kill this unit, even if it is firing into, say, a scout squad. I have been done dirty way too many times in a Tyranid shooting phase by just flubbing rolls and my opponent making really, really good armor saves, etc. Last but not least, fixing this mistake, of course, is while committing, consider punchbacks and angles for the next turn. If you're moving out your exocrine to shoot at something your opponent has exposed, that means that you have also exposed a unit on your end as well, primarily that exocrine. So if you're moving out your exocrine to get rid of, your buddy's scouts, even if your exocrine kills those scouts, does that mean that your buddy's gladiator lancer is going to poke out and absolutely demolish your exocrine the very next turn? If the answer is yes, maybe find a different place to put your exocrine, or maybe wait 1 more turn if possible in order to save that big old beautiful bug. Mistake number 3 is not including a balanced list. Just like Oops All Tyranid Warriors, the cereal will provide you with a very balanced breakfast, you should also provide a balanced bug list for your tabletop game. Most lists will need around 5 scoring units. So the Invasion Fleet list that I've been rolling with most recently has 2 gargoyles, of course, 2 lictors, and then a neurolictor. So that's 5 scoring units right there. And then the biovore. I don't really count the biovore. I mean, I guess you can, but also he's just going to be in your list regardless. So even a Crusher Stampede list, I am still on the fence that you need to have screening units like gargoyles or Hormagaunts. My most recent stream that I was on last week, I brought a Crusher Stampede list that I think is very, very cool. But it still has 2 gargoyles, 3 lictors, a pyrovore, and then the biovore as well. I think the pyrovore just happened just because I had the points for it. But I really do like a pyrovore in the list because it's 40 points and you can just bring it in from strategic reserves to do a secondary, or just send it out, to trade for something, because it does have an objective control score. Uh, in addition, when you are thinking about your scoring units, understand if your list is a skew or not. A skew list is something like Crusher Stampede, where it's basically everything is monsters in it. The entire list is just monster, 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 monster. That would be a skew list, meaning that you have a very high toughness skew. So your opponent is going to have a hard time activating into that list because maybe they only have one or two platforms that can really deal with monsters. And then once you understand if your list is a skew or not, then you can kind of understand what scoring units or what screening units that you are going to want to include with that. That being said, if you're going with a monster skew, then I would recommend 2 to 3 screens to allow for your monsters to activate and kind of have a space to control the battlefield before your opponent is able to effectively activate into them. Now, if you're a different skew list, like a swarm list, you're going to want to have a balanced list of things that support that core, support that idea of the list. You're going to want to have venom thropes. You're going to want to have zone thropes to be able to give them a 6-up invulnerable save, et cetera, et cetera. So once you're understanding kind of the core and whether or not you are skewing in a way, then you can kind of designate the rest of your balanced list around those, ideas. Um, the idea with screens, there has been a good number of Crusher Stampede lists doing very well in tournaments with hardly any screens at all, if that. Those those lists are being piloted by very, very talented and very skilled players to that level of success. I'm not saying it's not possible to do that, but I think for the most part, most of us are going to want to have a couple of screens just to make sure that our monsters are safe. Or else, if you go up against world leaders or a very highly aggressive melee orc list, you could be dead pretty much turn one by a huge alpha strike. I touched on this before a little bit, but understand your core of your list. Figure out what the main units you want to have in your list, even before characters or whatever, and then build around that core in order to make sure that your game plan, whatever you want to do with your game, is being well supported with a well supported list. Mistake number 4 is not using your biovore effectively. There's a lot of conversations that I see pop up in our Discord or online about whether or not Tyranids absolutely need to have a biovore in every single game. I don't like being the person that says, yes, you have to do that. But honestly, at this point, if you want to be competitive with Tyranids, you probably need to have a biovore in your game. And I would think that if people are questioning or wondering that, it might be a case that we're just not using our biovore as effectively as we can. It is probably one of the strongest units in the game, not in terms of destroying models or, just absolutely demolishing and immediately winning the game with, but its versatility and its power in controlling the field as well as scoring points. There's not really a whole lot of units out there that are available to the game that do what the biovore does. A video a while back, I introduced the acronym SAS when talking about your biovore, and this is just the priority in which I think you need to activate your biovore. So the first S stands for scoring. If your biovore can score points for you through engaging all fronts, behind enemy lines, or even area denial. Did you know that a spore mine can score area denial? It's pretty cool. If your biovore is able to score any of those secondaries for you, it might be a good point to prioritize that, because that means you can put a unit somewhere that you don't really care about. If your opponent kills your spore mine on the next turn, who cares? Not me. I'm actually kind of okay with that. Next is advance denial. If your opponent is like world leaders, like I played last Wednesday, you want to be able to dictate where they're going to be able to activate their advance and charge and maybe screen out and deny them a very tempting charge. Of course, the spore mine blocks out advances within 6 inches of it, and that is an incredibly useful tool to use. In addition, it can move block by, if your opponent has a unit that moves 10 inches, you can just put spore mine exactly 9 inches away. You effectively take off 2 inches of its movement because it can't move within 1 inch of that spore mine. It's kind of tricky, but if you're able to practice and really make use of placing your spore mines effectively, they can really, really help your gameplay. Then next is screening. If you are not scoring with it, if you're not really worried about advancing and charging or advancing and shooting from your opponent, see if there's a place where you can put your spore mine on the battlefield that your units are not going to be for the rest of the game. this is going to screen out 9 inches from that spore mine and maybe make it a little bit more difficult for your opponent to bring in deep strikes or reserves. It counts as a model, so your opponent is going to have to show up at least 9 inches away from it, with most units coming in from reserves. Last but not least, it is a gun. You can shoot it. So if none of those other things you feel like you can activate effectively with the biovore, just shoot it. There's been a lot of times where I've killed transports. I I think I've killed the Silent King one time with the biovore. It's just phenomenal when you just roll the dice and see what happens. Because it has dev wounds. It's a pretty good profile if you think about it, for 50 points. And last but not least, I do this in basically any facet, any part of the game, is explain to your opponent what you're trying to do with it and have them agree. Because the spore mines rules are pretty finicky. And if you just have a conversation while you're placing the spore mine with your opponent, say, hey, I'm going to try and block off your advance with this 6-inch bubble here, so it makes you harder to go over here, blah, blah, blah. Just have that conversation, double check with your opponent, and make sure that that is something that they agree that, yes, that is what would happen there. Same thing with move blocking with a spore mine. Because, you don't want to go into your opponent's turn and they do something that you thought you had stopped them from doing, and you don't want to get gotcha your opponent on their turn as well. Biovores, they're sassy. Mistake number 5 is not understanding the damage check that your army might be presenting towards your opponent. Now, when I speak about the term a damage check, it is knowing exactly what your opponent can or can't kill efficiently within one turn of activating. So a lot of people will say that they're trying to play a high damage check army. That means that they're going to be playing either an army with a whole bunch of monsters, with a really high toughness, just some durable units that they push up the board and hope that their opponent can't deal with in an effective amount of time. In addition, this is also true for armies that are like swarm armies. If you put 60 Termagants on the table and buff them through Venomthropes and vulnerable saves, as well as Feel No Pains, how easy is it going to be for your opponent to kill that many Termagants? And that comes to this idea, is if you are able to look at your opponent's army and understand how well they're going to activate into your units as well, that should kind of dictate the pace of the game that you are going to go about. I have often made a mistake of not being aggressive enough with my monsters when I play. This goes back to a very specific game that I was playing against Eldar before they were nerfed for the 18th time. I should have been pushing up my Maleceptors as well as my Exocrines up very quickly, because they only had, I think, 4 shots of Bright Lances in total that would have activated into my monsters like a Maleceptor or Exocrine. Now, odds are that 4 Bright Lance shots are maybe going to kill one of those monsters. If I push up very aggressively and I, make them activate into just 1 instead of 3 or 4 of my monsters, then they're going to kill one of my monsters for sure. But then my Exocrine and my Maleceptor and whatever else is left over is going to be able to activate, very well into whatever my opponent had to present in order to kill all of those monsters. However, if I play very cagey and maybe I only send 1 monster up at a time, there's a very high chance that my opponent is going to be able to kill each of those units as I send it up. So instead of really presenting a damage check and understanding that my opponent cannot kill all 4 of these monsters at once, I would piecemeal each of these monsters, and then they don't really have to commit too much because it takes less to kill less monsters, right? And then I'm not really able to activate in a way that I want to, because I only have 1 monster that was out in the open where it can activate regularly. Whereas if I send a whole bunch at once, then whatever they're not able to kill next turn is going to be able to push further into their lines and then make an effective game make an effective play in the game. However, be careful with that. Now, if you're playing against an army that is absolutely able to just disintegrate, 3 or 4 monsters all at once, then yes, play cagey. Make sure that you're playing like a little cat and mouse game with your lictors or your scoring units, and have them come out with those killer units first and then present back with a very large counter punch. You never want to give your opponent just enough to kill. That means that, they activated very easily and they killed exactly what you sent out. You want to either give way too little or way too much for them to activate into. Way too little is maybe like one lictor, maybe a gargoyle squad is left out in the open. Way too much would be, okay, my opponent cannot kill all of my monsters at once. Let's send everything all out. And then you have to present your opponent with a bad decision of maybe split firing and ending up not killing anything, or maybe just biting the bullet and only killing one of your units as opposed to your entire army. All right, everybody, that is this week's Tyranid Tactics video. I hope you liked it. Please go in the comments and let me know what you thought. Give me suggestions on, what things you would like to see in the future. Comment, like, and subscribe, all those cool things. Make sure you check out Secondhand Geek. Very excited to be working with them. They're an incredible website. And if you click our affiliate link in the below, you're going to get yourself some really good hobby supplies, as well as maybe supporting the channel a little bit. All right, that's it. I'll see you Wednesday. Bye.